to there. So what I want us to go through, what I want to try and bring in really is, like, I'll edit this in a bit and whatever else, but like it's pretty much introduce you to my people, and hopefully, obviously, it can go from there. But obviously you've been my teacher and whatever else, and friend for a while now, and I just think I want to talk a little bit about kind of anatomy from your perspective, and how we'll brush on like 21st century anatomy versus like you know
Mm.
17th, 18th, 19th century anatomy, I guess, and sort of a little bit about, well, I want to talk about your book a bit as well, because obviously it would be a good thing to bring up.
Thank you.
And
You just ask me questions. I'll follow
yeah,
your lead.
cool, perfect. Right then, so hi Joe, how you doing?
I'm good, Wibbs. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and joining me on this little chat today. It's honestly a huge pleasure of mine and honor to have you come and talk to me. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to briefly give a little overview of Jo, and then I'm going to let her introduce herself properly. But Jo has been my teacher and my friend now for pushing on probably 5.5 years, I reckon. And it kind of goes right back to when I first came home from India, and my sister-in-law bought me Jo's book, which we will definitely be going into a whole bunch more throughout this chat. But yeah, it's basically a book about yoga, anatomy, fascia, and movement, which is, for any of you who probably know me remotely, are all my favorite things. Jo has got kind of the experience and kind of history of working with some of maybe the inverted commas, for those of you who maybe, I don't know what I'll do with the video, where I'll put it up or not, but inverted commas, sort of bigger names of kind of fascia and anatomy and stuff, but at the same time has kind of always, it seems to me, just gone on to strive and learn and just dive deeper and deeper and deeper than sort of it seems that most people do. So again, thank you so much, Jo. I'll let you kind of give yourself a little brief introduction about yourself and who you are and what you do.
Well, just to give a background context to all of this, I was always fascinated by meditation and ancient history and fine art and poetry. I did English literature and fine art at university. And by that time, I'd gone to a center to learn transcendental meditation, which I didn't know was part of the extended yoga philosophy of Ayurveda. And I just wanted to learn how to be still. And I had no idea what an asset that was. And I met and married a man who was a chocolatier. So I spent 20 years, from sort of 1920 to 40, making chocolates all day. We had the first Belgian chocolate factory in this country, in UK. And I had no idea that that was training me for understanding liquid crystals, because chocolate is a liquid crystal. But I had no idea what I was doing. I thought I was making chocolates. And it was fabulous and fascinating. But one of the things I was learning was how to deal with emergent properties. So we just hold that thought. We'll come back to it. So, cut a very long story short, I had a son when I was 33, and was I 33? Something like that. And I had chronic back pain. I couldn't carry my newborn around because I was in so much pain. And I went to have physio, and they wrapped a band around my hips and a band around under my armpits and laid me on a table, and that opened, and they opened the table, so effectively put me on a rack.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever been in so much pain in all my life. It was worse than the pain I was in and the pain of 48 hours labor.
Yeah.
And now I know what I know. I would have done it all so differently. But that as it was, I couldn't carry my son around. So I was advised by somebody to do yoga, and soon discovered that I was, inverted commas, brilliant at it, but discovered also that that brilliance wasn't actually particularly an asset, because I'm hypermobile. So just because I could fold myself in half, back bend and forward bend, and sat there like little Miss Clever Two Shoes, I was actually making my situation worse. And I was lucky enough to work with somebody called John Stirk, who was an osteopath, still is an osteopath, still is a friend of mine. And he said to me, hold it back, hold back, hold back, hold back. You're doing too much. You're leaning right into your ability because your body's made that way, and you're going to pay for this. So I want you to move consciously. And that fascinated me. What does move consciously mean? And so I studied anatomy, and I studied biomechanics, and I studied physiology in order to study yoga further. And then in 1998, I met Tom Myers, who came to teach in Brighton. And he walked into our studio in Brighton and he said, there ain't no muscle connected to no bone, nowhere in no body. I was like, anatomical heresy, which I love. I love maverick.
Yeah.
John Stirk's a bit of a maverick, and so is Tom Myers. So that was the beginning of a long relationship. I worked with Tom. I trained with him in the States. At one time, I lived at his house with him and his wife, Quan, and I was teaching for him there. And I was kind of about to move there, I think, but circumstances were tricky here in the UK.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to know more, did a lot of dissection with Tom and worked out the anatomy trains. And there were things about the anatomy trains that were just like, this isn't answering my questions. This isn't explaining the motion. Because remember, I didn't come from a massage therapy background. I trained in structural integration with Tom from a movement background, so which was pretty rare. But I can sail a boat. And so he said anybody that can sail a boat must be kinesthetically aware enough to take my training.
Right, yeah.
And so all these disparate things, I came across tensegrity, which Tom introduced me to. And as usual, wanted to study more and find out more about it. And the original models that animated the knowledge of biotensegrity were done by Kenneth Snelson.
Yeah.
And Buckminster Fuller was an architect who actually Tom Myers treated at one time and knew.
Right,
and he was an architect who worked with geodesics, with round things instead of square things, basically.
A lot of those domes you see, isn't it, are kind of like the Buckminster Fuller kind of ideas.
Yeah. And basically, Kenneth Snelson was Buckminster Fuller's student, and he came up with what's called the X structure, and it was a model. He was a sculptor, so this is back to the art. And his sculpture of the X was so profound because it was called a floating compression system. In other words, there was a tensional network suspending a compression architecture in its sea of tension, and it stayed there poised. And Buckminster Fuller called that tensegrity. And many, many, many years later, someone called Dr. Stephen Levin coined the term biotensegrity. And I was coming from Tom and all the fascia, and then I worked with Robert Schleight for several years and facilitated his workshops in the UK. And I started to see that the combination of movement and manual therapy, the anatomy and the biomechanics, there were all these common denominators, that real people move in real ways according to nature and their archetypal patterns. And they don't fit the rules of the anatomy and the biomechanics that I learned in order to do the things that taught me that those rules didn't make sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely.
So I went through a period of complete, just what on earth is going on here? I really struggled. And I was ridiculed by my anatomy teachers, not by John Stirk, but by others that I worked with during my yoga career and working with Tom. And honestly, it was humiliating.
I wonder how many of those now are kind of suddenly very much on the train of thought that
I can't tell you, it was awful. Well, I remember I had the Mickey taken out of me on Facebook because I had said, I'm fascinated. I mean, I've been working with Robert Schleight for 5 years by this time.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew his presentations inside and out. And somebody wrote on Facebook, just because somebody wrote on Facebook that anatomy was emotional. And I had been watching the Gunther von Hagen's Body Worlds exhibition work.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to it 1,000 times. And I'm fascinated by Gunther von Hagen's. And he's not always popular. There was a lot of rumours about where he obtained bodies and so on. But I have to tell you, there's very strict rules about this sort of thing. So I'm inclined to think that there's competition and jealousy involved in those statements, but whatever.
Yeah.
But he did an interview in which he explained that he first did the first Body World exhibition, which, for those that don't know, is they take bodies and they do something called plastination. So they set the cadaver in such a way that you can see it really brilliantly. You can see the anatomy in the three-dimensional static, but in a three-dimensional posture. And he explained that he first did it with every body in anatomical position, which is, feet hip width apart, toes slightly turned out, palms facing forward, hands by the side, staring straight forward, like a butterfly with its wings pinned to a wall. It's real flat. And he went to the exhibition to see people's response and was fascinated that they came out terrified. And they said it was so frightening to see them, my words, like butterflies pinned to the wall. Is that all there is to it, sort of thing? And then he realized, and this was wonderful in his interview, he said, I realized anatomy is emotional. Anatomy isn't a subject that can be just reduced to its components, but people coming to see anatomy as if it's part of them are emotional about it.
Yeah.
And that's what that ignited the idea for him of all these different positions and having people in different postures. So to that end, on Facebook, I wrote, I'm fascinated at the idea that fascia is a sensory organ. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't write something like that if I hadn't got a clue what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And one of my teachers wrote, just because there's nerves running through the fascia doesn't make it sensory. And then a load of people got on the bandwagon and took the piss out of me. And I can't even tell you, it was horrible, because by that time I knew bloody well that the fascia was the sensory organ, and I'd done my homework, but I was being fried on a fork.
Yeah.
And it was horrible, really, really horrible. And I saw that teacher that week, as I did every week, and he came up to me and said, sorry about the thing on Facebook. I didn't know that. Literally, I went on the stage and everybody jeered.
Yeah.
Yay, copyright that line. And I just looked at him and he said, I think I might owe you an apology. And I said, yeah, it's a shame you couldn't apologize in public. You can take the piss in public, but you didn't apologize in public. And I kind of parted ways, and it was a big step for me, because I walked away from what had been up to that point, Wibbs, my solid foundation on the idea that all my teachers knew what they were talking about, and the biomechanics and the anatomy that we'd learned from them was right. And Tom Myers, I did the first anatomy trains dissection, and the second one I had access to by dint of a very weird set of circumstances. And I realized that we carved them to some extent. They didn't reveal themselves, because in fixed formalin or in any form of preservation, you can make it up a bit. Mm-hmm. You can, now, look, don't get me wrong. I really value what Tom Myers did. He took us from bits to bands.
Yeah.
But to go full circle, having kind of found my way and then been found by, in many ways, John Sharkey, I was invited to the British Fascia Symposium to present on biotensegrity, and Steve Levin gave me his blessing. And so I was kind of representing biotensegrity there. And that's where I met John Sharkey, who's a clinical anatomist.
Now obviously become, the biotensegrity.
That's how we met.
Was how we met. I mean, I was going to say, the first, I first met you and John, in fact, at your one series that you were
One
doing
series.
down in London. And you know, for me, coming from my nursing background, I've always had a fascination of movement and anatomy and things. And all of a sudden, I can still kind of remember, you know, we had the net out, and we were kind of the balls kind of, and
Yeah.
and then even, you know, John putting his hands on someone's forearm and, like, you know, moving tissue, and, like, you know, the way
Bending
things,
bone. Yeah.
yeah, and the way
Blew them
things
away. Yeah.
glide around it. And it was just, you know, for me, it was kind of like, wow, I, I did have your book, but I hadn't got through huge amounts of it by then, because I think I got the book, and then that one series was like, you know,
It was immediate.
3 weeks later
Yeah.
or something like that, you know. But for me, you know, then I've watched you from there, and, you know, I now see you with John. Obviously, you and John, I was going to bring John up. Obviously, you've done it anyway, but like the two of you now kind of being proponents of like this kind of biotensegrity, kind of fascia integrity type.
Yeah. 21st century anatomy, John calls it.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but basically, and obviously, as you were just saying, like, I mean, I'm hoping to get John and you on here together at some point. I think that would be an amazing chat. But just as you were about to do,
Yeah.
as you were about to say, until I rudely interrupted, just, you know,
No.
let people know a little bit about John, because obviously, I'd love to know how you two working together has kind of informed and evolved your, if you like, your understanding of your views on, you know, bits to bands to perhaps, you know,
Bodies.
Yeah.
Well, it's bits to bands to bodies to beings for me, and it's kind of come full circle, because when I met John, we met at BFS, British Fascia Symposium. And I'd heard of him, but I was terrified of him because he's a clinical anatomist, he's an exercise physiologist.
I thought you were going to say he's terrified him because he's Irish or something, but
no, God, no. But I'd heard of him because he was on the
yeah.
Irish. It was the only non-medic as such, because he's not a medical doctor, but ludicrously a clinical anatomist is a person that teaches medical doctors their anatomy.
Yeah.
So it's a very weird thing, because you can have a doctorate without having a third of his qualifications in terms of understanding the human body. And I've always said to him, you're my medical insurance. If anybody ever has to take a knife to me, I want you there, because what he doesn't know about fascia and the structure of the human form is frankly not worth knowing. And I can say that, I mean, he teaches advanced brain surgical techniques. Do you know,
I think from, you know,
another world, Wibbs.
From a nursing perspective, let alone a movement perspective, and obviously it all kind of ends up coming together. But, like, you know, really, I think if surgeons and, you know, the medical world could have a better understanding from people like John as far as, you know, fascia is concerned, how much I want to say suffering, that might be slightly strong a word, but, you know, could be prevented with people post surgery. As like, I mean, I know it's getting better, but, you know, the way I look at scarring and those kind of things, you know, if you could take John's view, and, you know, not just John's, but, you know, obviously he's the clinical anatomist, but if that could be put into some of the medical world even more so than it kind of perhaps currently is, you know, how much work would that perhaps save people like yourself and your kind of structural integration and me and my
Well, it
movement
would put
and
us
stuff.
out of business, really. I mean, I say that cynically, I don't mean to.
No.
I'm just so a couple of things on what you brought up which are really important, I think, to know. John was nicknamed Fascia Man at his alma mater at Dundee University because he's been talking about fascia for decades. He's also been talking about tensegrity architecture for decades, and why that's so important is basically, and we can just put it in a nutshell here, we have all inherited 400 years of anatomy training that's pretty much taught the way it has been for the last 400 years. Now, that isn't to say that it hasn't been progressed, but any nurse of 50 years ago, for example, and I've met many, have said to me, we were always taught that fascia was inert packaging, because that's what was generally taught that connective tissue is something that in any cadaveric specimen, you cut it open, you scrape away all the
just
stuff,
the bubble wrap,
and then you get down, it's the bubble wrap, exactly. It's inert packaging, and you take it away and it leaves you with the things, whether they're bones, muscles, joints, vessels,
organs,
whatever. Organs, yeah. And what has become apparent, excuse me, is that the fascia is, in fact, the largest sensory organ of the body. And the research over the last 2 or 3 years has shown it to be a magnitude way beyond what we understood before. And I'll give you a great example of that, and then I'll come back to John. We now have smartphones. They've only been in existence since 2007. And now, if you look in your smartphone under settings, you'll see one called haptic, sound and haptics. And what is now coined haptic perception is basically down to the fascial matrix, because, people talk nonsense about it. I've heard people say it's basically dead tissue because it hasn't got any cells in it. That's complete crap. I mean, it's just crap.
Yeah.
The fascia is the living matrix, and it is a liquid crystal. And when I got into an argument with an osteopath once about some movement thing, and I just ended up looking at them saying, I was in a conference, and I just said, I'm really sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand. And this person looked to Steve Levin and said, well, will you explain it to her? And he said, well, these were Steve's words. She's right, but she doesn't know why. And this osteopath had explained bending moment at the human knee and right angles of motion and biomechanical levers and all this. And I just stood there and I just said, look, here's the thing. I can't argue with you in your language, unfortunately, because I don't speak biomechanics. But what I will tell you is this. No one has ever come into my clinic, laid on my bodywork table, got up and moved away better than they came in, or got on a mat and done their yoga and moved off the yoga mat and ever done what you've just described. It's not human. There are no levers, lines, flat planes, or exact symmetries in living, non-linear biologic forms, period.
Yeah.
It's just not even up for discussion. And we've inherited this 400 years. Well, here's how I say it, Wibbs. I can't find another way of saying it. We're under a spell. We're literally under a spell that the classical anatomy naming of parts, which is fantastically useful, do not misunderstand me. If you're a nurse and somebody says, oh, he's hurt his ankle, you need to know whether it's the medial or lateral malleolus. You need to know which ligament it is. You need to know whether they everted or inverted their foot. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is the spell is that we can collapse the distinction between location, pathology, and movement. They are 3 different things. I can give you a map of how to get to my house, and I can give you a number that will get you to my house, but you haven't got a clue when you follow all of that what the accommodation is. Is it a shed? Is it a block of flats? Is it a castle? Is it a 3-bedroom semi? Is it a 10-bedroom mansion? Not a clue if I give you the address.
Yeah.
I can give you the coordinates of that address, and it will get you very, 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 very close, get you to my front door. My postcode and a number of my house will get you to my door. But you still haven't got a frigging clue what I live in.
Yeah.
How old it is, how much space it takes up, what its architecture is. And the truth of the matter is that 21st century anatomy, a phrase coined by John Sharkey, is that the fascial matrix is a soft tissue, shape-shifting, round thing, self-assembled by you, expressing you as you. And so I've made it my life's mission to explain that. And oh boy,
so
is it
since you've
unpopular
taken
sometimes.
and since you've taken that up, and as I kind of, you and I had, like, we often ping pictures, videos, things backwards and forwards to each other with, like, hand
Seriously,
on forehead. So with the current buzz around fascia being the the emperor's new clothes and whatever else to it, all these people, how does it make, how do you, and you're wanting to try to explain this to people, you see on Instagram and whatever else, and people are saying, oh, use this, fascia blaster, it's the greatest thing ever, or just do this stretch to stretch and whatever else your fascia around your ribs. And I think I sent you one the other day, and it was kind of like just this side bend reach thing, sort of saying about how it's the greatest thing for fascia since sliced bread or something. And yeah, from for, I guess, for those of us who are watching Instagram, or are suddenly hearing, whether anyone who's listening to this is kind of like movement people, hands-on therapists or whatever else. Do you know what I mean? What's your thoughts about all of this new ideas about movement, or stretching and blasting and whatever other adjectives there might be, as far as ways to move better? I guess, at the end of the day, people are trying to help people, but they're
sometimes they're trying to sell.
But I was going to say, like, you would hope that people, even if they're trying to sell something, they're trying to help people. But I think sometimes it does come down to selling is more than helping.
It comes down to an understanding. And here's the big thing about the fascia. First, I want you to know that the year before now, where are we, 2021, 2019, for the first time, all the international associations of anatomists all got together in London. Every 5 years, they have a kind of Olympics for anatomy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in London in 2019. And John Sharkey was invited to apply to present. You don't present, you have to have peer reviewed. It's all got to be gold standard research. And because he's fascia man and he had the Mickey taken out of him for so many years, of course, the word fascia came up, and God knows how, but he got invited to apply. So he went to Professor Carla Stecco, who is famous in the fascia world.
Yeah.
And she's actually been sanctioned to open the archives of anatomy at Padua University, which, go back to pre-Leonardo to Vesalius.
Right.
In all the anatomy archives are there, and they were kind of closed in the idea that we've named every muscle of the body and kind of that's it. And they've been reopened for her to name the fasciae, as I understand it.
Right.
So he invited Carla, and I know her personally, so I'm referring to her by her first name, and Vladimir Chemensky, Professor Vladimir Chemensky, who's head of the Gunther von Hagens Institute, and a couple of others. So they all got together and they applied together because John felt it was much more appropriate that the whole application was based on not his ideas, but on the world authorities, at that level, at the curriculum. They were all professors. And they did indeed present. And it was standing room only. Everybody was completely fascinated and thrilled and excited. And John talked about scar tissue. And somebody said to him, one of the surgeons said to him, "Are you saying that if I do surgery at the pelvis, it's affecting the shoulder?" And John said, "I'm saying that you wouldn't know because we don't think that way. We don't think in terms of the body being made of one piece, and that when you cut one piece and stitch it together, you've affected all of the rest of the body. You would, if you came in with shoulder pain having had your appendix out, you probably get sent to a physio who specializes in shoulders. So why would they go back and see your surgeon who'd done the appendix, for example? I'm making some of this up and paraphrasing, but basically it was, what you've got to remember and appreciate is that the surgeon was only ever taught to scrape the fascia away and go for the organ or the issue or the thing they're cutting out, and they're saving lives. So I'm not denigrating the medical fraternity. What we're talking about here is this understanding now of connectivity is the first thing. The second thing is that the haptic perception, i.e. the sensory nature of the fascia, means, as you said earlier, that pain is involved. Now, I know somebody who the year before, 2019 again, it was quite a year, 2019, had to have a hysterectomy and was sent to a particular surgeon in the Midlands, not where they lived, because of the way this doctor does hysterectomies. And the particular way this doctor does hysterectomies takes 3 to 4 hours to do one op, which is usually an 80-minute surgery. And that 80-minute surgery is,
in and out,
as I understand it, basically cut and chuck method.
Mm-hmm.
This surgery takes 3.5 to 4 hours to use 4 tiny holes in the abdomen, look through a laparoscope through 2 of them and cauterizers through the other 2, and spend 3.5 hours subtly, gently, carefully, meticulously lifting the entire reproductive suite
Mm-hmm.
off its fascial surroundings. Now, we all think of the uterus in the female. You've got the uterus, you've got the fallopian tubes, and you've got the ovaries.
Yeah.
And what we often don't realize is that in the body, that is a folded winged structure. It looks more like a dove with its wings open, the uterus being the body and the fallopian tubes being the wings with the broad, it's called the broad ligament. And it's actually like a folded sheath of gossamer.
Yeah.
And let's just imagine that tissue is sensory. And she spent 3.5 hours subtly, gently, and carefully removing all of it, and then removes the whole reproductive suite, let's call it, through the vagina, and then seals the top of it.
Right. Yeah.
So there's no cut. There's just 4 tiny holes in the abdomen, and an existing tube is used to remove what's at the top of it anyway.
Yeah.
So there's one scar where the cervix was at the top of the vagina.
Yeah.
And the standard response to that surgery is that it's day surgery. At most 24 hours, a few paracetamol, no need for morphine because there's no pain.
Yeah.
Now, that is not the standard for a hysterectomy. It is usually weeks, if not months, of pain
Recovery
and dysfunction and recovery. And the difficulty, as I understand it, and this is third, fourth hand information, so this is gossip, I'm gossiping. It's good gossip, but I'm gossiping.
Yeah.
As I understand it, this doctor is up against proving the value of her work over the standard methodology, because if you can imagine having 8 hysterectomies a day on average go through one doctor, whereas at 3.5 to 4 hours a time, there's
They've
2.
got 2. Yeah.
But the difference is you're not keeping anyone in unless they live too far away to be watched, because there's always issues. Everyone's unique. And you're saying no morphine, no aftercare, no being in hospital, no pain.
No follow-ups.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So it's going to be quite a bit of time while these figures come out and compare.
Yeah.
Now, however this doctor has done it, I have worked a bit with Professor Neil Galloway, who's his work on female restoration of the pelvis and things like meshes, which should not be in an open system. We're not even going to go there, but he has been somebody who's really motivated me and inspired me and encouraged me to just get out there and talk about it. Because to answer your thing about, let's say, fascial equipment designed to pound the fascia, what we're understanding is the fascia is a very amazing organ in that it can express itself as very, very delicate just under the skin, and very, very robust as bone, as lumbosacral fascia. It has the tensile strength of steel.
Yeah.
And this is a bit mind-blowing, because how can something so thin and so fine also be so various in the body, or have so many different characteristics? And with that knowledge, is this changing understanding of its different manifestations, and we're learning slowly. It would be totally irresponsible for somebody who's decided that it's not fat, it's fascia, which is nonsense, by the way, and you can pound it out of existence and it'll go away. No, 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 no. All you're doing is mobilizing the tissue, but that fat has formed in pockets of fascia under the skin to save you, because if you're eating stuff that your body can't handle and detox fast enough, it's going to park it safely wrapped in fat as far away from your organs as it can, which is usually under the skin. Obviously, if the system backs up, it will pack around the organs as well, but that's, you know. But it's there for a protective means, and it's other reasons how to get rid of it from the inside out, not from smashing it.
Yeah.
Because at the same time as the fascia is so robust, it is so sensitive. And one of the reasons that this equipment bruises the skin is because it's breaking down blood vessels and capillaries. It's damaging the circulatory system. It's damaging the lymphatic system, which is very close to the skin. And it's probably not doing the skin, the integumentary system, much good either.
I know in the functional movement world, I mean, there's a functional patterns guy who he's all about, you know, I think, are they adjectives? I'm pretty bad at English. Like smashing and, you know, beating up and, you know, all of these, you know, smash the shit out of the fascia and all this kind of stuff, which
it's abuse.
Every time I mean, I never really, obviously by the time I watched any of that, I'd already been working with you, and I was just kind of watching how he worked with it, and it's kind of just such a prehistoric view of, you know, moving, and I think you know, going from, as you've kind of brought up, you know, bones to bands to bodies to like beings, you know, trying to view the body as a being rather than as yeah, which, you know, kind of brings me on to, I guess, my next thing, which, you know, we're going to go into your book in a second, but it's so filled, and, you know, your talk of the spirit, like, is runs throughout all your work, and obviously I think I always remember you, did you write it in your book or did you just tell me about it? I can't remember. Probably just told me, but that, you know, you got asked with your book, why have you got yoga on the title? Because actually it would be so much more, you know, if you got rid of that, we could like sell it to everyone type thing. You know, Pilates and, you know, PT or whatever else. But for you, the yoga was so important in the title for this very reason of like an animating spirit and things. So I don't know if you kind of just want to brush over perhaps the idea of, you know, why going from, you know, prehistoric, you know, not prehistoric, but, you know, 19th century anatomy of bits and bones on a bench, bits and bones on a bench, essentially on a bed, going through to bands, potentially still on a bed in some ways as well. You know, the anatomy trains does work more kind of closed chain, but, you know, we've kind of been in such a an open chain of anatomy understanding for so long now. And actually, I think, you know, the work I do and I know you do and stuff is much more about this whole body, like this holistic closed chain, you know, closed body understanding, which kind of leads us into this spirit, I guess.
Well, it's I love the way you see it, because it's like, yeah, we're whole. Everything we do, everything we move moves everything moving everything.
Yeah.
And we self-assemble.
Just say that again.
So
just say that again, just so people can get around their heads.
Everything moves. Okay, so we have this idea that we're a system of levers, because we're told that. And when you study anatomy, and you and I both studied anatomy till we're blue in the face, learning all the parts, all the places, all the locations, we then learn that levers are first class, second class, and third class in the body. Now, a lever, I will answer that. A lever, and repeat what I said, is an open 2-bar chain that is joined with a pin. So you have one bar and another bar and a pin. Where's the pins? Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is, where's the open bars? Because if you're using, and usually the demonstration is the elbow, if you're using the elbow as a demonstration, it's open at the end of the fingertips, but it's not open at the shoulder, it's joined up. So it's
Yeah.
not an open 2-bar chain. So there are no open 2-bar chains. So this idea came from Borelli, who in the 16th, 17th century, who cut off dogs' legs. And so he had a whole thing with an open chain at each end, and he folded them at their angles and their joints.
Just to show how good a lever they are.
Yeah. And of course, it was the Industrial Revolution. So they had mechanical explanations, and that's how we inherited the idea from him, and also from René Descartes, who was an horologist who studied clocks. And he was the one that got sanction from the Pope to dissect human bodies if all the invisible essence of being, of mind, of spirit, of soul, of the invisible forces of the mind and the emotions remained under the jurisdiction of the church, science could have the body. So between them, not only was the body segregated from anything that ever animated it, but it was also industrialized and mechanized, because René Descartes said it moved like any other automaton, which actually means self. Autos means self. So automaton means self-motivated thing. But he was an horologist. So he was talking about clocks being self-motivated, that they move by themselves when you leave them alone. And actually, his statements were lost in translation. A lot of people think he said, I think, therefore I am. And he actually said, cogito ergo sum means I doubt, therefore I am. So in other words, I am self-conscious, I am self-aware. And he was actually talking about self-awareness. He was actually talking, and I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but he was actually talking about proprioception, which is kind of how the sense that we ascribe to haptic perception is our sense of where we are in space, our soft sense. And in yoga, we spend a lot of time in physical postures animating our sense of where we are in space in order to be able to be still. So remember, that's the point. The point isn't, can you wrap your leg around your ears? The point is, can you undo the tensions in your body and sit still and quiet so your mind can shut up and your body not suffer?
That's
You
the
can
one,
just
isn't
be
it?
in a state of stillness and transcend the physical. And that takes us right back to the Ayurveda, the TM. Can you meditate and sit in stillness? Because that is not a muscular effort, it's a neurological state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we can be still and animate stillness, that's a power. And fascia for me explains that absolutely perfectly. But everyone is unique, because if you think about it, at no time did your mother go into hospital and have your limbs bolted on. You grew them. You, the architect, self-assembled the architecture through which to express yourself as the architect.
Yeah.
And in so doing, at all times, everything moved, everything moving, everything.
Everything moved.
So
Everything moving.
moves, everything moving, everything. Because we are a closed kinematic chain, not an open 2-bar chain, but a multi-linked, multifaceted, closed, enclosed, closed kinematic chain, meaning inside this, everything's connected to everything else. So when I do this, the rest of my body knows about it to varying degrees of amplitude.
And that kind of takes us back to the surgeon, if you like, asking John or whoever it was about, if I cut an appendix out, is it going to affect my shoulder? If we then look at the body as a closed what's the word I'm looking for? Integral.
Integrated? Integral.
The integrity of the body. If you cut open appendix, I'm going to use that one because I've had mine removed. If you suddenly break the seal, for want of a better word, you cut through the skin, that is going to change let's go back to Buckminster Fuller and Stephen Levin, the tensegrity of the whole body, you know, as tension in one place is loosened. That's a bad word, but you know, as it's cut. Yeah, as it's, you know, if you remove tension from one place, another place is going to have to overly tension, and another place.
Careful, I'm going to stop you there, because that's where people get muddled up, and this is the problem that we have. We've only got one language, and so far we use things like stiffness, tension, stress, strain, resistance as negatives. We say, oh, my shoulders are so stiff, or I can't do yoga, I'm too stiff to touch my toes, or oh no, I'm feeling stressed out, or no, I've got too much tension, I need to relax, I need to let go, I need to yield. Right, let's just put all those words in a pot. A tension compression architecture is a spider's web. So in order to tension the web, the spider has to attach it to compression things around it.
Trees,
so it's not tensegrity. Yeah, it's not a tensegrity. It's a tension compression architecture. Think of a tent. You put poles in pockets that are ever so slightly smaller than the pole, and you make these very clever jointed bits in between so that you can have shaped panels at different angles, but it's all under tension. It's a tension compression architecture, but it can't hold itself up. It's got to have guy wires to the ground. It's got to be pegged to the ground. Yeah. So again, that's another kind of tension compression architecture. And it's a very good one to think about, because if you think about a marquee that's been completely tensioned and you take a knife to the middle of it, it won't just have a cut in it. It will open out in the shape of an almond, because it's already under tension. So it's pulling. The tensional pull is in the fabric anyway, and so when you cut it, it opens. That's what happens in the human body.
Yeah.
Now, we are tensegrities because we wear our frame on the inside. We harden up from the inside out. We're born without bones, a little bit of cranial ossification, but not much. And we develop our bony matrix through use, through force transmission. Now, if you think of the body, and this is a really helpful metaphor, imagine a wetsuit, a neoprene wetsuit. If it's lying on the floor completely relaxed and soggy, there's no space, it's just folded. That's the tensional network with no compression.
Yeah.
So now imagine yourself in a unitard, like a body stocking.
I don't have to imagine myself. I've got loads of photos of myself in unitards.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. Love it. Imagine on top of that body stocking, you've got a unitard of a thicker fabric, a little bit tougher, yeah?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got a fluffy onesie going from head to foot again. And then on top of that, you put the wetsuit. So when you walk around, you can do anything in that multi-layered, I don't like the word layers, but for convenience, let's use it. That multi-layered thing, because everything's gliding inside everything else. But it's all tension because it's zipped up and it's tight and it's all pulled. It's not all folded and floppy and needing ironing. It's all taut. Your skin is generally, I mean, I know I'm aging a bit here now. I'm entitled to, but it's nevertheless taut. Yeah, it's pre-tensioned. So that example gets your head around how you're being like your bone structure, filling out and stretching the fabric of the unitard, the body stocking, the onesie, and the wetsuit.
Yeah.
You've already done that. That's what this looks like. And it's called a pre-stiffened, pre-tensioned architecture. We're already tensioned. So the lungs, when they're rested, they don't deflate like the wetsuit on the floor. That's a condition, as well you know. They sit, when we're not breathing in and we're not breathing out, they sit at 50% approximately.
Mm-hmm.
We are pre-tensioned. They're already half open.
Yeah.
Muscles sit at a kind of a halfway house so that we can do that gliding or that kind of motion. There's allowance. So when the body talks about homeostasis or allostasis, which is John's word, much better, we are in this poise, the sthiram sukham of balance. So just by walking around, gravity's pushing us to, or pulling us or pressing us to the earth, and ground reaction force is equal and opposite force. So we stand up away from it.
Yeah.
So we're already this balance of forces, this subtle balance of forces. Now, let's imagine that we've heat sealed ourselves into this layered things, which is very much like how the body is. And it gets cut, and you cut the wetsuit. It's going to open into an almond shape immediately because it's already tensioned by you in it.
Yeah.
And then imagine that you stitch it all back together again, but you stitch it in one seam. So you've now stitched the wetsuit to the onesie, to the unitard, to
Fluffy,
the
yeah.
body stocking, and you've stitched them all to each other, and you've stitched up the gap, and it's taken up some of the slack, so it's suddenly tighter on that side at the foot, for example,
Yeah.
or at the head or at the shoulder. So basically, you've taken this and you've pulled it in order to get enough slack to stitch it together.
Yeah.
There's the pull
Yeah.
on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Now, several things. One is it's all been stitched together, so it's no longer mobile in the same way. It's manageable. It's not dire, but it's manageable. But we have to understand it. Secondly, by understanding the fascia, there's ways of suturing that make it much easier to deal with. And thirdly, we know what to do on the yoga mat when there's scar tissue, if we do. This tissue is so sensitive, it's aware of all this detail. We're not, because we blanket name it, oh, your shoulder hurts, it must be shoulder impingement. No. Have you had any surgery? Oh, yeah, I had my knee operated on years ago, but that's nothing. No. To you, to me, to a neuromuscular therapist and a structural integrator, the first thing we want to know is what scars have you got, because they're pulling on the whole shtick.
Yeah.
Now, your bones grew from the inside out much faster than all the other tissues, and that's how it tensioned. It's a bit like a tent growing itself. The poles get inside the pockets and grow the pockets.
Yeah.
And they take the tent canvas with. And that canvas and those bones, arguably, are all made of fascia. It's just that we can't get our heads around how many different qualities it has. Now, here's the key. You self-assembled the architecture to express yourself as the architect. And you used your genetics, which made you a human, as opposed to an owl or a frog or a Great Dane.
A cat.
Or a cat, or anything else. So it was species-specific genetics, however, with no kinetics to express themselves in. Those genetics aren't moving, therefore they're not alive. So there's something that animates that self-assembly into form. And no one can breathe for you. No one can occupy the space you're occupying. No one can move for you. They can't. They can move you, but they can't move for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you are the anima animus that respires, respirates, animates your form, whatever state you're in, whatever age and stage of fitness. And that fascinates me because it's a resonance field. And what I know is, depending on how that beingness behaves, so there is a direct correlation to the body.
Yeah. Perfect. Love it.
Does that say it?
Yeah, spot on. So,
and what you do on the mat, I've just got to say, Wibbs Coulson, is amazing. And what I love, and let me say this, I've watched you for 5-6 years go from zero to hero. I mean, like literally. And what I love is how your reflection of what you do is so much more inward, and yet you've expanded.
Yeah, that's kind of.
And that I just want to throw out there, because if you want to get your head around understanding fascia, and it's one of the things I say early on in the book, is you've got to understand paradox, because fascia connects and disconnects. It's the most sensitive and it's the most tough. It's the quality of etheric awareness and emergent properties, because everything changes everything else, so it causes everything else to change.
Yeah.
But it's also that which holds you in your positions that you've always been in, because it accumulates your history.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And if you can't get your head around this paradox of the way it handles time and timing and tempo, you're never going to understand it. And if you beat it up, it'll do exactly what any thixotropic substance will do. If you bash it, it hardens.
Yeah, I was going to say that's
If
kind of
you
one of
pull
my
it,
favorite kind
it
of.
tears.
It's one of the best kind of simple tests or like little tricks you can do with corn flour, isn't it, to kind of demonstrate the that kind of fixed-tropic effect. Well, we're kind of getting on to being an hour already, which is ridiculous because, as is always the case, whenever we chat, like time just flies by. But just briefly about your book, because as I say, we've brought it up. It's called Yoga, Fascia, Anatomy and Movement, and the first edition was maybe 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, I guess.
2015, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, oh, bloody hell, it's 6 years ago then.
It's bloody hell, yeah.
Yeah, shit.
And you're on the cover of the second edition.
Yeah,
Yay!
well, that's what I was going to bring up. So, I mean, my copy of the first edition is so dogged. No, that's no, that's fine. My first edition is so dogged and like well read, and you know, there's stickers on so many bloody pages, etc. But you've got a second edition coming out soon, which is amazing and sort of updated. And I know, having fortunately pre-COVID 2020 lockdowns in February, wasn't it? It was just over a year ago. Beginning of this month, a year ago, I got to come down to Brighton and hang out with you and Bex and Dexter and Helen and the photographer Amy. And we did some photography for the new edition, which I'm honestly, it's kind of like when you phone me, I'm just like, would you, come down and do some modeling for it? It was kind of like, shit, yeah. Like, it's kind of like a bit of a dream to, for one, like obviously be involved with the work you're doing, because as always, kind of, it's an absolute pleasure, but to kind of hopefully, be somewhat immortalized within this book, which I have I honestly think is going to be, as like I've said, it's one of my most read anatomy books, because it's not really, it is an anatomy book, of course, but it's a yoga book, if you like, with just a lot about anatomy in it. So you can go back and just read, it's not like getting Grey's Anatomy and like you never read Grey's Anatomy from front to back, do you? So yeah, like
I argue with it, Wibbs. I argue with it.
And obviously I know, because I kind of chat to Helen and things like that, who's the other kind of model in it. And I know she's kind of done some pre-reading of the new bits, and you've changed some of the chapters and things. And so, yeah, just very briefly before we round off, just perhaps give a quick highlight of what's in the book, what people can expect from it, and whatever else, because I'd quite like, people who, I'm hoping that a whole bunch of my yoga followers and stuff will, I was asked yesterday, what books do I recommend? Can I recommend any anatomy books? And obviously the first one I threw out was yours. Second one would probably be John Sharkey's neuromuscular therapy kind of book. But yeah, so I guess sell your book, Joe. That's kind of what I'm basically saying. Like, what's new in it? What do you want to tell people about it?
Well, I worked out what chocolate was doing in the story. So the fascia is actually a liquid crystal matrix, and what that means is a big deal. And why it matters so much in yoga is because yoga is such a broad expression of motion. We have vinyasa flow yoga, we have ashtanga yoga, we have restorative yoga, we have, the list, everything, yin yoga, so on and so on. And they all work. I'm not sitting here saying one's right and one's wrong. They all work. And so what is the common denominator that has them all work? And the answer to that is the fascia. And what has a modus operandi of yoga work for you particularly, and this is where I encourage people to find their own, is your body type, your fascia type. So in the book, we talk about fascia typing and posture profiling. But first of all, we just explain, I kind of deconstruct from maps to territories. It's such a different thing.
Yeah.
I'm not denigrating classical anatomy. I'm saying it's a map finder. Doesn't tell you what the accommodation is when you get there.
Yeah.
And so the book's divided into three. This book, the other one was, but this one's ABC, Anatomy to Architecture, getting us what I call across the Rubicon, to quote Carolyn Mace, who's one of my mentors. And what we're crossing the Rubicon is from this classical this is how the body works. You cannot deduce human function from anatomical nomenclature, especially not the way it's written today. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's a place list. It's like giving you a bag of watch parts and a manual with the name of every part. It doesn't tell the time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even know how to put it together. Telling the time's a whole other league.
Yeah.
So part A is anatomy to architecture. It's the parts and how we cross the Rubicon to understanding this multi-dimensional architecture that we already are and always were.
Yeah.
This is not news.
Yeah, yeah.
So part B is biomechanics to bioemotional integrity. And what do I mean by that? There's nothing mechanical about living beings. Our minds are mechanical, but our bodies are not. And we are emotional. We are emotional. We are energetic. We are in motion. And that integrity is explained by biotensegrity, which is not a model. It's not a theory. Biotensegrity is an explanation of nature. And no one's been able to falsify it yet, nor will they, in my opinion. But that's just me. And then the third part is classical to connected. And the third part is all on the mat. So how this book differs from the other one, it's much more about what do you do on the mat when you get to the mat.
Yeah. On it,
And a
that's probably
third
the
of
one
it
thing
is like,
about in that first one, it was kind of, it felt like, you know, that bit of what you do on the mat kind of, I don't want to say anything about, you know, publishers, you know, it felt like it was squeezed in for you, you know, it's kind of like, it was all
yeah,
there, but, you know, you didn't get a chance to really, like, you did all this setting the scene, you know, and then actually, like, it kind of,
the practice was
the
squished.
practice was kind of
Yeah.
squished, which I think is going to be amazing for people who are perhaps new to this whole thing, to be able to kind of have a book where they can kind of go, oh yeah, shit, okay, that's the A.
Well, I reorganized it. That's the A, this is the B, this is the C.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
what came out of it was people saying to me, Jo, listen, I love your work. It's great, gorgeous, but I don't understand how I can apply it. And
Yeah,
so out of that came the ABC course that you did with me, from, you know,
yeah,
from anatomy to architecture, biomechanics to bioemotional integrity, and classical to connected. And what I did was make the book based on that, because the difference for me between the book and the course is that the book explains the why and the where and the how and the right to do yoga this way. It's not doing yoga any different to how you do yoga. It's explaining it differently. It's
yeah,
explaining how it works differently, and it makes total sense. And then the ABC course is literally about transforming practitioners into fascia aware, biotensegrity aware movers, so they can straight away body read. I basically say they learn to speak fluent fascia, because it's a language, it's your body's language. And
yeah.
when you understand that language can shout and that language can whisper. Now, to go back to your bash the fascia into shape, who likes being yelled at all day?
Not me.
No. And what you're doing on the mat, and I've seen you do it over the years, Wibbs, is develop this ever more subtle sequencing where you throw out what you don't need, you focus on what you do, you get more and more subtle about it, and it becomes your intuitive practice.
What's
So the
become
first
nice
book
with
was,
that has been,
yeah,
sorry, I'm going to jump in again
no,
because I'm
no,
rude, but
yeah, do.
like, but with that is kind of how I used to, I mean, I still have a very strong inverted commas practice, but it's, for me, it's kind of been that intuitiveness of actually things which were, you know, needed apparently or whatever, has just been, actually, there's far more subtle, quieter ways to find strength and find, to generate action, to generate movement, to generate motion, than perhaps, you know, is traditionally shown, taught, whatever else. And it is just a greater understanding of myself.
It is. And with that comes an understanding of your resonance, which is what biotensegrity is all about. And here's the thing that I think people don't always get: when you understand how fascia behaves and organizes structure, which was never a big subject in anatomy, they don't talk about structure. So when we recognize it, what we understand is it's absolutely committed to energy saving. Your fascia is
Mm-hmm.
an energy saving device. And so what it's looking to do is balance you up all the time so that you can move with momentum and elastic energy, which is free rather than metabolically expensive.
Yeah.
So we do metabolically expensive movements to train ourselves, and then we become instinctive about them, and they become more elastic, more recoil, more, you get a spring in your step.
Perfect. Love that.
And you animate your vitality with much less effort, much less metabolic energy, and your energy storage capacity improves. So the practices in the book are more about understanding how to apply this to your practice, whether you're vinyasa flow, hatha, whatever form of hatha yoga you do, whatever it is, you re-cue, you cue differently, you animate differently, you think differently, and you have to take it into your own experience first. And I mean, that was always a criteria in my teacher training. You practice on yourself first, then help others, then work with others, because you're coming from wisdom of your own experience. And that really is what the book is about. It's not a how to do yoga. For God's sake, there's enough people teaching that. And it's definitely not how to do fascia. It's your fascia's already doing you. Have you got its language now? Can you speak it fluently?
Can you listen to it?
Amen.
Well, I reckon on that note, we'll round off there. Jo, thank you so much. Like, as always, like I've said, like, you're one of my most favorite people I can ever chat to, because like we've just done here, like the best part of an hour and 15 minutes or whatever was just vanished in seconds. No, don't ever apologize. Like I say, I hope I can get you and John back together, because I'd love the two of you to just get a little bit geeky and chat,
nerd out on 21st century anatomy.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? I know it's not necessarily going to be for, like, the layman, but I know plenty of people who will listen to this and just like get their brains blown by it, and for me it's been a massive game changer knowing the two of you, and like watching and studying and learning from you guys. So obviously mostly you. I've kind of worked with John a few times, but like thank you so much as always. Just briefly let people know, I'll obviously put it in the show notes in the bottom, but where can people find you? What can people do with you? Obviously lockdown is a funny time, but in some ways it allows for better online things. So just briefly give us a heads up of where people can find you and what they can do.
Well, my website's joanneavison.com, and there's a mini course on there of the first 3 chapters of the book has been made into a kind of animating the book. Basically, the first 3 chapters are done.
Perfect.
And then what's coming is ABC Online. So that's coming in April. So you can go on the waiting list for that. And that's going to be 100 hours altogether, but it's in 3 parts as well, ABC, same as the book. And it's not the same as the Yoga Fascia Anatomy and Movement Online, YFAM Online we call it, because that's actually accompanying the book to animate what's in it, because it's a lot to take on. So it's nice and easy when it's video. It's more turning practitioners into people that understand this stuff and come from it, and having them speak the language. And so that's due April. Part 1 is due in April. And I just want to say also, there's a free podcast on the website, and you're in one of them, and we had a fabulous conversation about how you're using these principles in nursing. So I love that. It's one I was
about to say, just make sure you don't forget to tell people about your podcast, because I mean, again, I'll put the link in, and I have shared the one I was in, but I've listened to a few of the episodes that you've quite a few of them that you've put up, and they're like the one with Helen interviewing you, if you like, was a great one as well. And then finally, what was the other thing I was about to bring up? Obviously the book. Now we don't. I don't know if you know or not. Handspring publishers, but like, do you know? Have you got any rough ideas for when publication might be?
April again. It's going to be. It's on my website, but you click through to Handspring. There's 25% off the first edition at the moment, and I think there's 15% off the new edition for pre-order. But if you go to my website, you click through, you go straight to Handspring. You don't buy it through me, you go to the publisher. So that's the way to do that.
And then obviously you guys, you can basically see my bum in that book, which, if that doesn't make you want to buy it, I don't know what would.
I love you, Wibbs.
I love you too,
you.
Jo. Thank you so much. Let's, yeah, we'll catch up very soon. And
keep in touch.
yeah, absolutely. Take care.